6:18 at KLIF. Good morning, I'm Dave Williams. Amy Shadroff is on vacation this week. Well, Dallas Cowboys quarterback Tony Romo expected to miss 6 to 8 weeks of team activities. He's scheduled to have what's called a Mumford procedure done on his collarbone next week after having it broken twice during the past season and once before that. And also he's had 2 back surgeries. Dr. James Pinkney is the founder and CEO of Diamond Physicians in Dallas. He knows about the Mumford procedure, and he's joining me now to explain it a little bit. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning.
So explain to us, if you can, the problem, with his collarbone, his clavicle, and why it keeps breaking and how this is going to help.
Well, just like you said, Dave, Tony has broken his clavicle 3 times since 2010, and the clavicle or collarbone doesn't take a lot of pressure to fracture that bone. So, when you're a football player, when you're a quarterback, and you've got a lot of linemen running after you and tackling with lots of force, that's basically what's caused the fracture. Now, he has to make a decision and decide whether or not to put a plate, a steel plate in the collarbone to reinforce it, or the Mumford procedure, which can be done arthroscopically with a camera, or open. So they're going to try and do the procedure arthroscopically, and they remove the distal end of the collarbone. So actually excise the bone, and that will alleviate pressure and stress on that collarbone. So if he's hit again, theoretically the collarbone won't break because there's no distal attachment point.
Okay, what is that? What is distal?
So the far end. So if you look at your shoulder,
okay,
the clavicle attaches to what's called the acromion, which is towards the shoulder, and the other end is towards the neck. So distal means further away from the body. Towards the shoulder is where they're aiming, and they're going to take the about 1 to 2 centimeters of bone away from the shoulder side of the clavicle.
You know what this sounds like to me? It sounds like I'm thinking. This is a stupid analogy, I know, but I'm thinking of my driveway that's got a strip of rubber going down the middle of it to allow for expansion and kind of cushioning. Is that the kind of thing you're looking for?
Think of it as a board placed on 2 chairs, with one chair at one end of the board and a chair at the other end of the board. And think of a martial artist striking the board in the middle and snapping it in 2.
Okay.
If that board is your collarbone, we're going to take away a piece of the board towards one of the chairs so that it's just hanging on one hinge. So let's say you have a piece of rubber or glue that's attached that board to one of the chairs, and now it can kind of swing easily. If it's not attached and you strike it in the middle of the board, now that it's not attached to the other end, it's just going to swing down and then swing back up. So it's kind of that's more the concept.
So it has a little bit less support. Now, I assume we're talking about the same clavicle. We're not he didn't break both of them at different times, right?
Correct. He broke the same clavicle all 3 times.
And why is that? Why doesn't you would think? I think most of us would think that when a bone heals, it heals and it's back to new.
Yes and no. I think the 3rd time he broke it, I don't think it was completely healed. They brought him back maybe a tad bit too soon. But the 2nd time, yes, it was several years later. It should have been completely healed. But again, the bone itself doesn't take a lot of pressure to break it. And when you're being struck with that much force, anyone's clavicle would have broken each time. So I can't say that, he has weak clavicle or a weak collarbone. It's just the nature of being a quarterback in the NFL.
Now, if I remember correctly, and I'm thinking of one of, I guess, the first time it happened early last season. I was watching the game, and if I remember correctly, it was not on his throwing arm side. It's on his left side. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, well, that's good news then, right? It's not going to interfere with his throwing.
No, he does. The rehab process is a 3-step process, and the first phase will just be rest, ice, letting the surgery itself heal. The second phase he will work on range of motion, and then the third phase will work on strengthening. So it is a 6 to 8 week process, and let's cross our fingers and hope that this is the last surgery for Tony Romo, and he'll be able to perform at his best afterwards.
You betcha. And then he gets a little better protection this year, too. Final question. I'm curious about this plate thing. We heard about that shortly, I guess, after the season ended, that there was a possibility they were going to put a plate in there. And I thought, wow, they're putting armor inside his body. What would that choice have amounted to?
No, essentially, that's a great analogy, and you're basically reinforcing that bone and giving it more strength. I have to assume they believe that even with the plate, if the collarbone is struck the right way, then you can still fracture the bone underneath the plate. So, Tony has great doctors, and they decided to do the Mumford procedure, and they feel like this is going to give him the best chance of not injuring that clavicle again.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time this morning. You've explained some things I've been wondering about every time I hear this mentioned that he's going to have surgery. So, but you think, from what you know about this Mumford procedure, that by the time we start the season, he should be fully ready to go. Is that right?
He should be 100%.
All right. Very good. Thanks, Dr. Pinkney. It's Dr. James Pinkney, founder and CEO of Diamond Physicians in Dallas.
The Dallas Cowboys hoping a surgery gets their quarterback ready for next season.
Doctors are going to perform the Mumford procedure on Tony Romo, which will have him down for 6 to 8 weeks. Dr. James Pinkney says the surgery will remove a piece of bone. Think of it like a board placed across 2 chairs.
With one chair at one end of the board and a chair at the other end of the board, and think of a martial artist striking the board in the middle and snapping it in 2. If that board is your collarbone, we're going to take away a piece of the board towards one of the chairs so that it's just hanging on one hand. So now it can kind of swing easily.
Well, that means future impacts to Romo's shoulder will be less likely to cause a fracture. Kristen Thrower, WBAP News.